Yeah, no problem.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to the seminar. Our speaker today is Mike Miller. Mike is an experienced technology and business leader. Since receiving his graduate degree in physics at Virginia Tech in 1980, he worked in 3 different technology-based companies, including a Fortune 500 company and 2 startups, and has founded a 3rd startup as well. He has been a board member at the Economic Development Commission and the Economic Development Authority for many years and has chaired both the bodies. His long-time experience with local companies and issues, as well as his many connections in the business community, have allowed him to contribute significantly to the economic progress of the Montgomery County by helping the economic development staff to match available services and facilities to corporate needs. He serves on the board of directors of the New River Mount Rogers Workforce Investment Board and the CEDS Committee for the Planning District Commission. Thank you, Mike, for agreeing to talk to us and sharing your insights about how to save our innovation.
Before we get started on the good stuff here, I do want to, there's something that's not, I don't believe is in this presentation, but I just realized probably needs to be there, is a very quick review of the intellectual property policy of Virginia Tech. Are you guys graduate students? Are there any undergraduates in here? Okay. So the IP policy at Virginia Tech, I think it's policy 13,000. You can go online and read it yourself, but basically what it says is that if you are a faculty member or a postdoc, or you are paid by the university, you actually have employment with the university, then your employment agreement requires that you disclose your inventions to the university and that you assign your rights to those inventions to the university for management. Because Virginia Tech is about pushing those out to the market. So they want to be known as, they say, talk about invent the future. They want to be known as a place that generates technology that makes a difference in the world. And that gets done by technology transfer process that we'll talk about today. So if you're an employee in a faculty, postdoc position, or in any other position that puts you where you would create inventive things that are not directed. So if you're just a software coding guy and it's your job to write software and somebody gives you a project and you write the software, then that is not considered intellectual property that we would do anything with university, outside the university. We might write that for internal purposes, and then you wouldn't be considered an inventor for that because it's not going to be really used as an invention. However, if you're a faculty member, you're doing research, you're a postdoc being paid off of research grants or using university resources, working in a lab, if you're a graduate student who is working on a funded project, or if you are working on the direction of a faculty member and working in their lab, then you are considered to be using a substantial amount of university resources. So technically, students own their own IP, except if that IP is generated under a funded project or with the use of a substantial amount of university resources that are not available to people. So so you guys are all working in labs doing something for somebody, but you can also come up with a cool little phone app that has nothing to do with what your research is. And if you were to do that, that belongs to you. And there are steps that I'll talk about how you go through to make sure that we register the fact that that intellectual property belongs to you. But it does. As a student, whether you're an undergraduate or a graduate, and even if you're taking a paycheck from Virginia Tech, if the IP that you generate does not use Virginia Tech resources and it was not paid for, and it doesn't have anything to do with the research that you are being paid to do, being funded to do, then it's essentially yours. and you can do with it what you please. You don't have to disclose it to us, although we encourage you to do so that we can put it on record that it doesn't belong to us, in case anybody ever asks. So I wanted to talk about that because there's a lot of, seems to be a lot of rumor on campus that all intellectual property generated by students belongs to Virginia Tech, and that's just not true. It's only true in those special cases where you're being paid to do it through university resources or funded proposals, something like that. So we'll get that out, make sure, and as we go through here, if there are any questions that come up, be sure and stop and ask me. Yes?
For example, if a student is doing project on site, not funded project, that I belong to it, or
Well, generally the interpretation is that your master's thesis is being supervised by your faculty supervisor or your committee, and their participation invokes the substantive use of university resources rule. Now, on the other hand, I had folks come to me the other day. 3 graduate students from 3 different departments came to see me. They had gone to a hackathon here, and they had come up with this really cool idea. It had nothing to do with what, they were in different departments, completely working on different things, but they knew each other, and they decided they wanted to disclose, or they wanted to do something with this idea. So maybe it's the next Facebook, I don't know. They didn't tell me what it was, but they wanted to know, so what's the deal? And the deal is, it's theirs, it's not mine. And even though they're graduate students, and even though they're being paid, what they invented didn't have anything to do with that. It was completely separate. And so what I told them to do was disclose it to me, and on the disclosure form, there's a little box you can check that says inventor owned. When you check that box and then have your department head approve it, then it's yours. And we will keep a record of it in our office in case anybody ever asks, did this belong to the university? And I will pull that out and say, nope, the department head said so. Well, they're back in, that's all I have to do. So now most of what you're going to be doing while you're here, because you don't really have a lot of time to be off playing around too much, or maybe you do, I don't know, but generally you're going to be putting a lot of time into some directed research, and that's all going to fall under the policy, and it has to be disclosed. And in fact, when you sign on your employment agreement, you actually are transferring the rights to your invention then. It has a paragraph in it that says, I hereby transfer my rights. So it's actually already transferred. When you fill out the invention disclosure, there's a place for you to sign, and you do it again. So, and that is a requirement. So anyway, when you get that straight up front before we get into all the other nuts and bolts of how this works. So we'll talk about this stuff, and I'll apologize a little bit in advance here. I set this up around medical technology for some reason. I can't remember why. I just keep using the same presentation over and over, and so my examples are mostly medical technology, but it applies across the board. So I'm actually a physics math guy from a long time ago. Worked in all these different companies here. I worked for a couple of years at Cleveland Clinic, and I do a lot of economic development stuff locally here. I've also been a screener and mentor for the world's best technology showcase. It happens every year in Austin or someplace. And I've held various positions at startups and larger companies. Let's talk about innovation in just a minute. You don't spend a lot of time thinking about innovation except in the kind of generic sense in that whatever you're doing represents innovation. But innovation is kind of a tricky thing. It often comes at you from an odd direction. For example, in this case, John Gorey was a physician in the 1830s, 1840s, 1850s. And after he got his medical degree, he moved to Apalachicola, Florida, and had a practice there. And he liked doing research on tropical diseases. And if you think back historically, in the very southern climates and in the Caribbean and in parts of Africa and the Middle East, any place where there's a lot of water and heat, people get malaria. So tropical diseases like malaria, things like that, that's what he liked to do research on. And at the time that he was doing this, the germ theory hadn't really caught on yet. And there was still the theory of bad air, which is that people thought that diseases like malaria were caused somehow or other by contaminants in the air. So there was an outbreak of malaria and yellow fever in 1841, and he went to work trying to figure out how to do something about that. And in the hospital where he worked, one of the things they did was they would have a ward full of malaria patients or yellow fever patients. They put them all in this room together in beds, and they would have essentially things that looked like chandeliers that they could lower down. They were kind of bowls, and they would put ice in the bowls, and then they would raise them up to the ceiling and let the cool air flow downward and essentially air condition the room. But what they thought they were doing was creating good air and displacing the bad air, and that was going to cure the patients. Now, of course, it didn't cure any patients. It probably made them more comfortable, but it didn't cure anybody. But he didn't know anything about that. He thought that was the right thing to do. But if you're in the summer in Florida in 1840, ice is far away and not really attainable too much. And back in those days, what they did was in the Great Lakes and places like that, in the middle of the wintertime, they would go out and saw blocks of ice out and transport them, or they would store them in ice houses. They might ship them in the winter to storage places around the country that were ice houses where they were insulated and everything. And then when it got warm and you needed ice, they would go into the ice houses, pull out the blocks of ice, and ship them around locally where they were needed. But if you're in Florida, that's a long way away. So he needed a way to get cool air. So what he did was he actually invented an ice making machine in 1840s. There was some technology around that he was familiar with, and it was not for this, though. It was really related to steam engines and that sort of thing. But the idea of compressing air and then releasing it and how the heat cycle goes, he used that technology to create essentially an air cooling machine, but he could make ice with it. And he made cool air for his patients. Now, of course, still, no patients got cured from that. But what he did do was create two things. First of all, he invented air conditioning, which we're all very thankful for. Second thing he did was he created this device which other people saw as being useful in the meat industry. So back in those days, if you wanted beef, which most people in this country ate chicken or pork because it's cheap and it was locally grown, and cattle, beef cattle, were not grown everywhere. They were not raised everywhere. And there were these huge places like in Texas and Oklahoma and all these places where they had the big beef cattle. What they would do is they would ship the cattle on cattle cars to the east, and they would be butchered at the location where they were going to be served. But there was a lot of death of animals along the way and all that. And you had to feed them and all this sort of thing. You had to keep them alive until they got there. Trains didn't go all that fast back then. You're not talking about, put them on the train today and take them off tomorrow in Boston. You're talking about a week or two worth of time. And so it was inconvenient, and for that reason it was expensive, and people in this country didn't eat much beef because of it. So some enterprising folks figured out that if you took his ice-making machine, you could make refrigerated cars. Okay, and refrigerated cars allowed you to butcher the beef on site and ship the butchered beef to the location and not let it spoil. And so suddenly you could get beef all over the East Coast, New York, Boston, Washington, all these places where lots of people lived. Suddenly beef was cheap and available. So they started eating beef. And that's why you eat hamburgers instead of pork chops now. Because we started to become a country that ate beef because beef became cheap and available. Population centers were. And it was because this guy was trying to cure malaria. Those things have nothing to do with each other, but that's the way innovation works a lot of times. Probably some of you know, well, you don't know, but you've probably heard of this. This is a blood pressure medicine. This pharmaceutical was developed to treat high blood pressure. It turned out to have some side effects that were extremely valuable. Okay, and so they don't sell it for blood pressure medicine. Oh, they sell it for other reasons. There was this guy named James Broslow, who was he was a pediatrician. Well, he was a family practice doctor in Detroit, And he decided he didn't want to live in Detroit anymore, so he picked up and moved, he closed his practice down, he moved down to North Carolina. I think he was in Hickory, North Carolina, not too far from here. And he was getting ready to set up another family practice there. But of course, when you first move into a community, you don't have any patients yet. And it takes a while for your patient load to grow. So when he didn't have very much to do, he worked at a local hospital as an ER physician. And one night he was working in the ER, and a lady walked, she burst through the door carrying an infant. And she saw him, he was the only one there with a white coat on, so she assumed he was a doctor, which he was. She came over and she handed the baby to him and said, "Help me." The baby wasn't breathing. And so they all panicked and went into full ER mode. They took the baby back, and they started working, trying to revive it and everything. But the problem is, they weren't used to treating infants. All the medicine, all the dosages, are based on body weight, and the size of tubes are based on adults. And they know how to calculate downward to reduce the dosages and change the tubing sizes and all that sort of thing for smaller people. But they had to think, and they had to stop and think to do that, as to do the calculations. And the baby died. Now, the baby probably was going to die anyway, because who knows how long it had been breathing. But the fact is, he got very upset because with all of his knowledge and experience, he couldn't save that baby because time was of the essence, and he didn't have time to do all the things to translate the dosages and everything downward for that baby. So what he did was, he went back to his pediatrics book, and he went in the back, and there are tables that relate dosages. Well, first of all, they relate height to weight. So as a child grows, there's a one-to-one correspondence between the height and the weight of the child. And weight is how you determine dosages. It's so many milligrams per pound for the patient. So he went through and he got all those tables out. And the other thing is the size of your little finger is the size tubing they use for you when they have to put tubing in you for an adult or a child. Okay? And the size of your little finger also correlates to your height and to your weight. And so everything was eventually correlated to the height of the child. So he created a chart that's which is called a Broadway tape. You see here in the middle. That's called a Broadway tape. What you do is you lay the child down on the table, and you take this tape and you put one end of it at the top of the head, and you stretch it out, and wherever the heel is, that's the length of the child, and everything that you need to know for dosing is right there. All you just read, if it's green, you read all the green numbers. If it's blue, you read all the blue numbers. You don't have to think about anything now. You do it just like that. And then eventually made a whole crash cart full of these things. Now, it's not patented because he didn't create anything new. All the information was already there. It's all known by every doctor. And what he did do was he copyrighted his tape. And eventually he licensed this exclusively to GE Healthcare. And they now sell them for $25. You can go buy one yourself if you want. And for every one of those $25, he gets a nickel or something. And that's how he made a lot of money, because this is now standard for every hospital, every ER in the country. There's a guy named Paul Lauerber who was a physicist, and he thought it would be really cool to figure out how to map the location of water inside the body, so give you some idea of internal structures. So he was in I think he was in Pittsburgh, and he got off work one day and he stopped at a big boy restaurant. He was eating a hamburger. And he pulled his napkin out, and I was just thinking about this. And in between bites of his hamburger, he sketched out the concept for the MRI machine. And that, many years later, of course, through a lot of development, turned into something that's in every hospital now. And also it gave him a 2003 Nobel Prize in Medicine. So innovation crops up in many places, in many ways, and it often comes in ways that you don't expect. Now, to get to the tech transfer mission and how that's carried out, we need to talk about this. So what is technology? Is it basic science? Well, yeah, there's basic science and technology. Is it engineering? Well, certainly engineering can produce technology. And is it product design? Yeah, you've all got those smartphones, right? That's That's technology, represents technology. But what technology really is something business people use to make money. Okay, so this is really fundamental to your understanding of how the cool stuff you do makes a difference in the world. Okay, and this is the reason. Innovation just doesn't happen for its own sake. Now, science does sometimes. People research weird stuff just because they want to know more about how nature works. Maybe eventually somebody takes a piece of that science and turns it into technology and into a product or something. But in general, for engineering people, what you're doing is translating science to products. And you're doing the front end of that piece of work. But the front end of it is not where products are made. The back end is where products are made. So what you're doing is getting a boost on that. You're providing the opportunity for business people to translate your ideas into some kind of product, like a smartphone, for example. So a lot of people think this is the way it works, that you have some brilliant idea and then some kind of stuff happens that you don't really need to know about because you're engineers that don't care, and a product design comes out of that somehow, right? And then the product design is wonderful. So in this case, it's medicine, and it's like, oh, you cured cancer. Yay, you. And you go to Stockholm and get your Nobel Prize, right? But that's really not the way it happens. This is the way it happens. You have a great idea, and then a huge amount of money is used to turn that idea into some sort of a product design. And then, especially if you're talking about medicine, another even bigger amount of money is used to produce that, test it, make it safe, and then distribute it to customers. Okay, and in this case, you also have to go through FDA approval, right? Huge amount of money. You're talking $100 million or more just to do the testing. And by the time this happens, you're so old, you've forgotten what it was all about, and maybe your grandchildren get something out of it or something. So where does the money come from to do this? It comes from investors. So this is the key thing. Your cool ideas are on paper. You may build a prototype or some kind of a laboratory model. That's great. Nobody can buy that, and nobody can use it except you. Nobody knows that works for you, pretty much. And it doesn't matter how cool it is and how much you think you made a product out of it. The fact is, that's not a product. It takes somebody to come in and invest money to take your idea, go get design done. You might have to do tooling or manufacturing. There are distribution channels. All these kinds of things have to happen. And if it's medical, you have to go through the FDA approval process. It takes about $800 million to introduce a new drug to the public. $800 million. Now, you're not going to pay for that, right? Somebody has to pay for it. So who pays for it? For investors. So those investors may be in the form of Pfizer Corporation or AstraZeneca or something, but whoever they are, they have to pour a lot of money in. And I'll give you an example. I used to work with people at Boeing who make the airliners. Every time Boeing introduces a new airplane, they bet the whole company. It takes so much money to design and manufacture that aircraft that if it's not successful, it will sink the whole corporation. So they have to do really good on the marketing side. They have to know that it will be accepted at their levels that they need it to be in order for the manufacturing to continue and the company to keep going. And if they bet wrong, that company goes out. So it's hugely important. The market side of things is hugely important. All the money that goes into taking your idea and turning it into the product that can be sold in the market is investment. What intellectual property does, well, what intellectual property protection does is reduce the risk for the investors. Okay, so if, say you're wealthy guy and you want to do investment, you've got more money than you know what to do with, so you're going to start investing in companies, right? Well, the idea is that you put some money in and some stuff happens and then more money comes out and you turn around and do it again. And you just keep doing it and doing it, right? That's how capitalism works. But you don't want to put money into losers. You want to put money into winners. But if you put money into a product that doesn't go anywhere, you lost your money and then nothing good happened either. So the thing that a patent does, it prevents people from practicing your invention without your permission for 20 years. Okay, so during that 20 years, only you can practice your invention or whoever you designate to do it for you. You're the only ones who can practice it. So you can make money for 20 years. At the end of 20 years, everybody gets to copy it if they want to. Now, 20 years now doesn't seem like, I mean, that's forever. But back in the day when patents first started, 20 years was, well, they didn't do it in the business started out 10 years. But the idea for what patents do is they teach people how to copy your invention. That's exactly what they are. They're complete descriptions of your invention that you agree to tell everybody how you did it in exchange for this temporary monopoly that allows you alone to make money off of it for a while. It's like, drugs go generic sometimes. So the drug is real expensive, and then when the patents run out, 6 other companies jump in and start making it, and the price drops dramatically. That's exactly what Congress meant to have happen when they wrote that law. They want you to tell everybody how you did your invention. And in fact, if you look at a patent, a valid patent is it's a legal document, not a technical one, even though it has technical stuff in it. But it's actually a legal document. It is a complete legal description in enough detail so that somebody equivalent to you, the inventor, is what we call someone skilled in the art, could take what that description says and reproduce exactly your invention. And that's exactly the point of it, is the Congress wanted your invention to be made widely public. Now, they didn't anticipate things would go so fast as they do today, where 4 years and you're over. For engineering stuff, it's all over very quickly. So 20 years is really, most of the time we do licenses on these sorts of things, 20 years, it never goes that long. People abandon that technology for the next one before it goes anywhere. So, but you do get to go in early and make money. And this is the law. It's Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, where the law is set forth. Now, intellectual property comes in several flavors. If you're making a widget, a radio or something, we cover that with patents. If you're writing software, we cover that with a copyright. Copyright's also used to protect any other kind of written material, like a song, either the lyrics or the music, poetry, drawing, anything that you can come up with that you can write down can be copyrighted. And in fact, it is copyrighted the instant you write it down. So if you write software, it's automatically copyrighted to you. And you may have to prove that you did it. And so it's always a good idea to identify yourself in the headers or something. But when you write software, it's automatically copyrighted to you. If you fall under the IP policy, you must transfer those rights to VTIP, to the university for management, so that we can try to license it out to somebody who would want to use it, like, say, National Instruments or somebody. Another thing is trademarks. The VT symbol that's on the helmets and all that, that's a trademark. The Virginia Tech logo, the shield, and all that sort of thing, the tagline, invent the future, those are all trademarks. And believe me, if you want to get in trouble, just go use one without permission. They will be all over you. All these people out selling little things with the VT thing on it, they all have to have a license, and they pay royalty back to Virginia Tech. And the VT thing is actually owned by the athletic department, not by the university. So it's kind of a different thing, but it's a source of their revenue that keeps the football and basketball and cross teams and all that working. The weakest type, but sometimes the most useful type of protection is called trade secrets. For example, the formula for Coca-Cola. That's a trade secret. It's not patented, because if it was patented, everybody would know what it is. But you could grab the patent and read it, and you'd know exactly how to make Coca-Cola. So they didn't do that. They keep it locked in a vault. And only a few people know what it is. And when you go to work for Coca-Cola, if you're on the production line, you're automatically covered by law that says you can't take that knowledge anywhere else. If you leave Coca-Cola, go to work for Pepsi, you can't take that with you. It's illegal. You can go to jail for that. And essentially that's the basis of industrial espionage. You take secrets of one company, take them to another, it's illegal. So while that seems to be the weakest, you have to actually keep it secret. That's very hard to do. But if you try to do that, things like the formula code has been very successful. It can be a very powerful type of IP protection.
Why isn't everything free?
Well, again, patenting can't be trade secret because you make it public, right?
Yeah, but I'm saying why is it
Well, if you can't keep it secret. So here's the thing. If you, you write software and you sell it, somebody looks at it, they can reverse engineer it, and then you can't do anything about it. If you make a widget, they can take it apart and reverse engineer it. So you need protection for that sort of thing. Method patents are more difficult because it's a patent on the process you use to make something. It's very difficult to figure out if somebody made something that you use that process. Not impossible, but like, for example, there are some chemical things, or some items that are made through some chemical process. And if that process is duplicated, there are telltale signs within the thing you made that show that. All you have to do is go buy one of the products and go look at it. And if you see those telltale things, then you can get an injunction. You just have to prove that that's uniquely signature of your process. I guess in some cases you can get a injunction where you can come in and look at somebody else's process. Not so easy to do that. So we talked about all that. Well, the term of the copyright is 70 years. It's the author's lifetime plus 70 years, and it can be renewed. So interesting thing, for example, a few years ago, up until a few years ago, there was what we call an old-time music jam at Gillies on Tuesday nights. So all the old-time musicians would come in and we just sit there and play old-time tunes. The old-time tunes were all public domain because they're so old and nobody owns them anymore. They're public. But occasionally a newer song would creep in and it was still copyrighted. And we were not making money off that. We were sitting around playing. And Gillies, when we weren't there, they had CDs, and they would just go buy some CDs and they stick in their CD player and they play music throughout the restaurant. Right? Well, there was a guy, who was a representative from BMI, who lived in Christiansburg, and he covered this whole area for Nashville. He showed up there one night and saw what they were doing, and he told them that they owed him money. And they said, what are you talking about? And, well, the jam, not so much, because we were really playing, public domain stuff. But the music they were playing through the restaurant was new stuff. It was pop music, it was recent music, that sort of thing. It was still licensed. And BMI and ASCAP are the organizations that manage the licenses for all the talent. So he said, you owe us money. And he actually shut them down for 2 weeks. They could play any music in that place for a couple of weeks until they bought a license. And the reason was, you would think, well, I bought the CDs. I already paid you your royalty, right? But they were taking the CDs and they were playing them in the restaurant. The restaurant was making money. Not selling CDs, but selling food. But the music was part of what they were providing to the customers. And they were generating more money. And that more money also was subject to license fee for the music. So they had to go buy a license. When you go down to Stepping Out and you hear people playing music out there, if it's not their music, the town had to buy a license for that day or for that music. Every restaurant, anybody who plays music, they got to have a license. That's the power of intellectual property. Your phone, on a typical, somebody a couple of years ago did a study, on a typical smartphone, let's say this scaled to $400 cost. So I know these cost more than that, but typically, if you took a $400 cost smartphone, $150 of that $400 is royalties that are being paid to people who have patents on the stuff inside the phone. And it's not like 2 or 3 people, it's like hundreds of people are getting royalties off of that. And what they do is they break it down like your Wi-Fi chip for the Wi-Fi circuit, $2. That royalty that it generates inside that phone is $2. The display is so many dollars, the antenna is so many dollars. Now, antenna is pretty cool because you got research guys here doing antenna design, right? So if we think about getting a $2, just even a $2 royalty, how many iPhone 6s were sold the first day, or the first week? It was over 1 million. And you get $2 off of each one, right? That's the power of intellectual property protection.
Most of all the iPhone out, loyalty are all paid to Apple.
Yeah, well, you know what Apple does? Apple has they have a lot of their own patents, but they will buy patents. They will buy a company just to get their patent. Somebody, Motorola or somebody, bought the Nokia patent portfolio for a couple of $1 billion just so people would stop suing them. They didn't know what was in it. All they said was, "We got more patents than you do. Come on, and we will bury you in defense forever. It will never come out of court because we got more patents than anybody else." And pretty much that works because nobody wants to go spend the money, figure that out. Because you go through something called discovery, which is done by lawyers who charge $400 an hour, and it takes 2 years. So you can imagine how much money is changing. They're only lawyers within this thing anyway. So what they do, you go buy a company to get their patents. And that way you can either use the patents or you can license them to somebody else if you don't want to use them, or you can stop people from doing things. We had a company here, we had technology. It was a polymer technology that was used to make glasses. So they're blanks that they use to make the glasses. The plastic ones anyway. They make the blanks and then they shape them. I think Dr. Wilkes and somebody else came up with this polymer. And there was a company down the road called Innovision, I think it was. They actually paid for the Wilkes to create the polymer for them, to their requirements. He came up with the polymer that worked. We licensed it to them. They started making eyeglasses. And then Johnson & Johnson came and they said, "Oh, we want to buy your company." So they bought the whole company and they got the technology, the machines that made the blanks and all that sort of thing. And they go to work and they're making eyeglasses. And then somebody in Johnson & Johnson decided, well, we don't want to be in that business anymore. So we want to sell that business unit off. And there's another company in France called Essilor. Essilor came and said, "We'll take it. We'll buy the Johnson & Johnson corporation that does eyeglasses. We'll get all of that." And what did they do with the technology that belonged to us? Nothing. They buried it because they didn't care about the technology. What they wanted to make sure was that nobody else could use it against them. So they buried it. And unfortunately, the original license agreement, it was written by not me, but somebody less experienced, didn't require them to ever do anything with the technology except pay patent expenses. And so they did. Just like clockwork, they sent their checks in to cover all the patent expenses. And we kept saying, "Hey, are you using the technology?" No, you're not going to. You're never going to. They bought the Johnson & Johnson customers. And they bought the technology to make sure that they took it off the street so nobody could use it to compete. But that's a really smart business move. It's made possible by intellectual property and transfer. And so it's really, that's why I keep saying that technology, and in particular intellectual property, is something that business people use to make money because that's how innovation gets to the marketplace. Trading, buying, selling, the patents and all that. That's what allows people to do commerce, especially groundbreaking type stuff. And I pretty much talked about that. The thing a patent has to have is it has to be useful. It has to be something useful. It's pretty easy. You just assert that it's useful. It will be. It has to be novel, which means unique. That is, it can't have been done before. And that means it can't have been publicly disclosed before. Because if it's publicly known, then you can't get a patent on it anymore if it's not novel. So that's why we file patent applications before you write a paper, before you submit a paper, well, before you publish a paper. Once you publish your paper, the secret's out. And then it becomes unpatentable everywhere in the world except the U.S. In the U.S., you can still do it up to a year later and you get for grace. Yeah.
What about situations when you subsidize someone? I remember looking at the form. Kind of thing who is focused about the idea for. How is this changing public disclosure point?
Okay. If you make what's called an enabling disclosure, that is, if you say enough about your invention so that the person you talk to could reproduce it, if they are like you, if they are equivalently skilled in the art as you, if you tell them enough detail and you create an enabling disclosure, then you have made a public disclosure and it's not novel. It doesn't matter who they are. If you're outside of Virginia Tech community, if a sponsor comes in and is going through your lab for his annual lab tour or whatever, and you stop and you go on the board and you ask some equations and stuff, and he goes, oh, that's pretty cool, and he writes them down. That's it. If you don't already have it covered, just publicly disclose it. Now, the way we fix that is sponsors generally have a confidentiality agreement built into their contract. So whatever you tell them, you can't be public. It's essentially not public. But if it's a potential sponsor that you're trying to impress, you love telling them what you're doing. You want to reel them in and get that money, right? But when you do that, you just disclose your invention. So it's very important for you to tell us those things first, or as early, as often as possible. And we don't stop you from doing anything. You want to publish whatever. We don't get in your way. We adapt to your schedule to make sure that we get you covered as early as we can. And if you forget, you forget. You still have a year, at least in the U.S., and we can still do it. But if it's been more than a year since you published, you go, oh man, I guess I should have told those guys about that. Yeah, you probably should. We can't do anything about it, and we don't get mad about it. I think it's just one of those things, you know. We can't capture everything that's going on campus. It's generally not your number one priority to tell us what you're doing. Your number one priority for students is to get your degree and get out of here. For the faculty is to get funding and produce more students and do cool stuff. And we come second. We understand that. And publishing is critically important for everybody. We get it. We try to do things like this to educate everybody so they understand the importance of keeping us in the loop. But, you know, we're not police. If you give it to us, we'll do something with it. If you don't give it to us, we won't. You know, but we will do the best we can with whatever we get from it. So if you want to, if you think you have a really cool idea and you want to see it someday, like if you're getting on that airplane and you look over in the engine and you see the turbine blade, right, you want to say, ah, I did that. That was me. Well, that's not going to happen if you don't tell me first, because I'm the guy who gets it over there. You get it to where it actually can do some good. Somebody has to license it to GE or Rolls-Royce or, you know, Whitney, whoever. And that's how the process works. You disclose it, patent it, and you license it, and keep track of it and make sure that we know that somebody's actually doing something with it. That's how we do it. The other thing a patent has to be is non-obvious. So you can make an improvement to something somebody else did, but if the improvement is an obvious extension, then the patent examiner will say, no, that's not patentable. For example, if I have a patent on chalk, okay, so I've been selling chalk, and I've got no way to sell chalk. And then you come along and say, you know, it'd be nice to have colored chalk. So if we took food coloring and put it in the chalk thing before we make it little sticks, we have different colors of chalk. You say, I want to patent that. And the examiner will say, no, because food coloring already existed, chalk already existed, and it would have been obvious to anybody to put those two things together, so therefore it's not. However, if you made a kind of chalk that was water resistant, that's patentable, because that's an unexpected result. It goes beyond something, it does something that the original chalk didn't do in a non-obvious way. I mixed polymer with it. Yeah, polymer existed exactly how you mix polymer with chalk to make it like that. That was not obvious. It took some chemistry to figure that out. Now you can get a patent. So sometimes we don't know where that line is. We'll make a guess. And if we're not really sure, we'll go ahead and file the patent applications with the examiner challenging them, and then we'll come back and argue with the examiner. That's part of what costs so much on a patent is like probably a minimum of $10,000 to file a utility application. And then the first time you get a challenge to it, it costs you another $3,000 to $5,000 to answer it. And if you have to go through that loop a few times, it racks up in a hurry. So a typical patent application of its life, after it's granted, you pay maintenance fees, to be in the order of about $20,000 to $25,000 to just to keep it valid. And that's only in this country. If you want to practice it in Europe, you have to file it over there. If you want to practice in Canada, you have to file it there. If you want to practice in Mexico, you have to file it there. Or Australia, or all these other countries, you have to file in every country where you want to practice. Otherwise, you don't get any coverage.
Someone invents something
Say it again.
Is it in public domain?
It is. Well, if you have a patent application, if you have a patent in Europe, they're prevented from using it in Europe. If you didn't patent in Europe, then you can do it. That's right. So you got the U.S. market, but you don't have the European market. And sometimes that's all we care about. U.S. market's huge. And other than for medicine and a few other kinds of things, we often don't care about the European or the Far East markets or Australian entities don't care because we are most of the customers do. It depends on what it is. Almost all biological things, that could be medical, pharmaceutical, something like that, we file them everywhere because we want to practice them everywhere in the world. Because everybody needs the medicine, and somebody can make money everywhere doing that, or at least somebody can dispense the medicine, and in the process we can get some money from it. Okay.
But that's the reason behind how the vehicle industry and IT industry are suffering from that Chinese production now. Everything became to the monopoly, and then companies put everything needed with cheaper labor costs, and now they are opening the market again. And
It's true.
and it's questionable even now if and sue those people who have some work with the American veterans.
10 years ago, nobody filed patent applications in China much because of that. If you couldn't enforce them, their laws weren't very stringent and they didn't enforce them anyway. And so you're wasting your time. But in the previous 10 years, Chinese have seen how important the U.S. markets are. Like all iPhones, all Apple products are made in China, right? They want that work. And in order to get that work, our government has twisted their arm a little bit and said you need to shape up on enforcement of intellectual property rights because that's the foundation of business, technology business in the rest of the world. And if you don't do that, we'll find somewhere else to have our product made. So they said, okay, we'll do it. And they've done better. So you can't sue people in China now. I don't know anybody who's done that. But I know that more people are filing patents in China now than ever before. Now, you know, the thing, what does Apple care about? It's the phone. So when Apple and Samsung get into a patent fight in the shape of a button or something like that, that's an international thing. And if it goes to the international courts, Apple loses. If it goes to the U.S. courts, Apple wins. It's fine. But those are actually design issues more than anything else. It's like the shape of the phone, the use of the button, the finger swipe stuff and all that. And Apple doesn't keep all that stuff to itself for very long. They get a head start, and then they let other people use it. Emulation, but Apple started it, for example. So that's okay. They still win when they do that because they're still getting money. What they do is, if they license it to Samsung, Samsung has to charge an extra $3 for their phone, or $10, or whatever it is. And that money goes to Apple. So Apple makes profit off the Samsung phone. And Samsung doesn't make profit off the Apple phone. So the distance between them, from a business standpoint, economic, gets bigger. And that's what Apple wants. They don't really want people not to use stuff. They want to make more money. And so one of the ways to make more money is to keep people from doing something. And the other way is to let them do it and make them pay you for it. And Apple does both of those things. But they only do it for a short period of time. I remember talking to a guy from IBM one time, and we were talking about patents and everything. He said that for years, AT&T, Bell Labs, and the Watson Research Center at IBM fought each other over patents. They were both working on the same things, and they were duking it out every single year over patents. And finally, some smart guy in one of those two places said, what are we doing this for? How about this? Why don't we just automatically cross-license each other on all of our patents? Because they were paying lawyers a huge amount of money, and it was never really settled. So they said, well, we're not tired of paying the lawyers money. Why don't we just pay each other? So at the end of every year, they have a little conference. They figure out who used what for what. And they use these, it's worth this much money, you use this, it's only this much money, so we owe that. Or that's this, whatever. At the end of every year or every 2 years or something, they get together and have a conference and decide who owes who money. And then they don't have to fight and they don't have to pay lawyers anymore. And whoever invented it already had a couple of years head start because the other guy doesn't know about it yet. And even if they file a patent, it's 18 months before it even published. So they at least had 18 months head start on it, which is how much more do you need today? 18 months is a long time. So it worked out okay for them. They got to use their technology to get a head start, and they got to license it to their competitor, who also paid them money. So that's the use of intellectual properties. There are companies called patent trolls, and they're called non-practicing entities. That is, they get patents and they don't practice them. But what they do is they sell you the right to practice. They license. I guess VTIP is essentially a non-practicing entity. We don't practice any of the inventions. We sell them. Well, we don't sell them, we license them, but same thing. So we're called a non-practicing entity, but we're not a patent troll because we're not trying to make money off of it. We're just trying to get it out into the public. If there are companies out there that only collect, they go out and buy patents and aggregate them and then license them out and make lots of money. And the new laws have been very harsh on those companies because that's considered to be not fair. That's not fair use. Now, if you're the inventor and there was a guy who invented the gas laser, actually he invented the laser period back in the 50s. He was a graduate student like you, and he was playing around one night and he figured out how to do a laser, how to make a laser. And he wrote it all down in his notebook and got it witnessed and all that. And within some period of time, he went out and got it funded. And because he was just a guy, he didn't have any money to go assert it again. I could go tell people you can't use that. You can't use that without a license. They'd laugh at him. So sue me, right? He didn't have money to sue him. So what he did was he sold his patents to these patent troll companies. The company was actually created. Went out and got a bunch of investors to put a bunch of money into it. They bought these patents and they went off and started suing everybody. And this lawsuit's going around and around and around. After 17 years, the Supreme Court actually had to get involved and say, yes, everybody must license lasers from this one company. All lasers in the world. By that time, lasers were being used for everything. The little pointers all the way up to manufacturing equipment that was cutting metal and all this kind of stuff. Everybody in the world owed those people money. They collected big time. It took them a long time to do it, but they collected. They got filthy rich. The guy who invented it, they paid him a couple $1 million, which when they paid that to him in 1963 or whatever, was a huge amount of money. He's happy. They made $100 million of it 15 years later. But so everybody won, and the lasers are all over the place. So it wasn't like it was unfair. But that's how, if you're an inventor, you want to be compensated for the use of your creativity. You don't have to do it yourself. You can sell your right to somebody else. In your case, you will transfer it to us. We will practice it for you, and we will share the money with you. The policy here at Virginia Tech is, and it's the most generous one in the country that I know of, we share 50% of any revenue with the inventors. 40% stays at VTIP to fund our operations. 10% goes back to your department, whatever department you're in, so for the school to get paid back. And most of the times, that 10% goes back to like a various account or a residual account for the inventors to use for other related activities. We did once, there was somebody here at Tech invented genetic manipulation technology where they could force plants to express pharmaceuticals. Originally, they were using tobacco plants to produce some kind of drug. And they got all kinds of funding. They started a company, and it grew up, and then it went out of business because they were technology people, didn't know how to run a business, unfortunately. So we licensed it to them. They started the company failed, we got it back. We licensed it to another drug company later, and they used carrots to produce some kind of pharmaceutical. And when our contract with them said that when you go to FDA phase 1 trials, you pay us $1.5 million. So in the $1.5 million, we took out about $100K worth of patent expenses and stuff that we paid out of pocket. We paid them back, leaving $1.4 million. Half of that went to the sole inventor of the invention. We wrote them a check for $7 million. Now, unfortunately for them, they had $1.5 million of debt when the company failed. But still, we erased half of their debt without
This
check.
money taxable.
I'm sorry?
This money still taxable.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, that's not our problem. You know, how you deal with that's your problem. We just write a check and, yeah, I'm sure it's taxable. But still, $700,000. And that was 10 years after they invented it. And they didn't, after the company failed, they just went back to being professors or whatever and didn't try that again. And, you know, 6, 7 years later, they just got checked. It helped them pay off the debt for their failed startup. Now, had they not tried the startup, oh, maybe they never would have gotten licensed at all. Maybe the fact that they'd done some stuff and published papers attracted the drug companies. And, you know, who knows? But, anyway, that's the way it works. So it's very valuable. One of the biggest places where VTIP gets revenue every year is on corn. So we have a guy here who knows how to make corn drought resistant or whatever it is you want to do through standard breeding hybrid techniques, not genetically modified, but he can get a plant. And then his plant patent is licensed to the big seed companies. And then when the farmers buy the seed, the plant, we were getting like $250,000 4 times a year just from all the seed that was being bought from Gen Tech. And every 2 or 3 years, he came out with a new variety that had new properties that everybody wanted, and then they would start finding new stuff. So that's one of the biggest things for the Gen Tech. And you know, agricultural products are big here. I mean, you guys don't hear about those much. You know, there's a dairy farm and all that sort of thing, and the horse center and all that, but actually agriculture is a really big thing here. You can get a patent on anything. Michael Jackson had a patent. He had a patent on how to create an anti-gravity illusion. And I don't really read it, so I don't know what it was. I don't care. But I think it had to do with there were things on the bottom of shoes or something that allowed them to not move. Or method of exercising a cat with a laser pointer. You can actually get a patent on that. Who knew? The craziest one I ever saw was a spacesuit, a helmet. Inside the helmet were plants. And the plants, of course, generating oxygen, right? This is a really stupid idea, but they got a patent on this. So the plants generate oxygen for you to breathe while you're in the suit, right? Of course, that's not really true, but somehow they got a patent on it. It's important to understand, I think we touched on this a minute ago, the patent is a legal document that describes your invention in particular language, and that's why we have to use attorneys to do it. They're skilled in the art of writing descriptions of your invention in a legal way. So this is an example, and you've not all seen this, you know, the optimist pessimist thing, glass half full, glass half empty, but illegal, the patent version of this is liquid HCl by cylindrical vessel. It's a precise definition of this situation. And that is one that will hold up in court. That one won't, and that one won't, but this one will. And that's important because in the end, if you make a lot of money, people will infringe you. And you will have to take them to court, and you'll have to show everybody will fight like crazy if it's a lot of money. The timeline for patenting is very long. You have 12 months from the provisional filing, so you have to convert it to a non-provisional application. When the non-provisional application is filed, you have 18 months until it publishes. It's another 6 months usually before you get the first office action. So now we're up to 3 years. Well, 2.5 years. You will go through probably another year's worth of arguing with the patent examiner. So you're typically looking at somewhere between 3 and 5 years to get the application to issue. And the money, as we talked about earlier, is probably going to be on the order of about $20,000. Virginia Tech gets about 175 new invention disclosures per year. Of the 175, probably about 50% of them we file provisional applications. We convert about half, maybe half of those provisional applications are converted. We license maybe 30% of the ones that are converted. And of the licenses, we probably get about 10% that ever make real money. we help startups get going and all that. Startups fail, we get IP back. We never really saw any revenue from them other than reimbursement of costs or something. But that's typical for all university tech transfer offices. Probably 10% or less of the intellectual property that's disclosed actually ever makes any money. But that's just the way the world works. It's not because somebody's better than somebody else. Now, I'm sure that Stanford or MIT or somebody probably have a better record than we do. But if you look at peer organizations like Georgia Tech, NC State, people like that across the country that are of our size, we actually do probably above average with what we get. We don't have very much budget. Purdue, where Dr. Sands came from, they have a $30 million endowment for their intellectual property. We don't have that. We don't have any endowment. We make about $2.5 million a year of revenue, of which 50% goes back out to inventors scattered around all over. It goes, if you leave here, like you invent something as a graduate student, and when you leave, we still send you the money wherever you go, as long as we can find you. If you're a faculty member and you're here for a few years and you move to another university, we still send it to you wherever you are. So that's kind of where we are on the curve. I think we do pretty well. We have a very small patent budget. We get a lot more patents issued per invention disclosure. The only way we could do better is if we had more invention disclosures, and the way we get more invention disclosures, have more funded research projects. So Virginia Tech's in about $400 million or so per year of funded research. Most of our peer institutions are significantly higher than that, like Georgia Tech's probably twice that. But they don't have any more licenses as needed. But they have twice as many research projects and twice as many inventions. We're pretty efficient with what we do, and even so, what we make money on is going to be a small amount. Anybody, I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember videotape machines. If you know that story, Sony came out with what was called Betamax format, which was pretty high quality. Somebody else came out with what was called VHS. Sony's marketing strategy was to keep Betamax captive to Sony products. So they used it as a draw to sell more Sony products. VHS went into all the other products. And you know what? There are more of all the other products than there were Sony products. Sony did a good job, and they sold a lot of stuff, but eventually the market was dominated by the VHS technology, which was not as high quality as the Betamax. But Betamax went out of business eventually because market conditions were such that the lower quality product was cheaper and more pervasive, and so it just took over the market. And eventually Sony had to discontinue all that stuff. And I know you probably don't even use DVDs anymore. Maybe you do, but we're in the streaming age now. But before streaming, you have DVDs, right? The same thing started up. There was something called HD DVD, and then there was Blu-ray. Now, there might have been some other formats, but they never made it to the final cut. But everybody remembered what happened with the VHS beta thing and how the market got fragmented. They said, we're not going to do that again. We're going to pick one now. And so they went through some kind of a trial period, and eventually some standards committee said, it's Blu-ray. And everybody dropped HD DVD and switched over to Blu-ray. Now, the only thing you can buy is Blu-ray. And that was done intentionally in the market by people who had lived through the other process and saw how divisive it was and how it kept people from making as much money as they could. So just settle on one right now and go forward with it. To some extent, your MP4s and all those other kinds of formats and things, now the market has gotten smart enough to realize that you need to standardize and let everybody go compete. And it's more is better now. So there's not so much exclusivity and everybody gets cross-licensed. Because the idea is make as much money as you can. You're not going to do it. Nobody's an island anymore. So like I said, your phones, you probably have 1,000 different patents cover that phone. And they come from 1,000 different places. So that nobody has a complete capture on the phone. Apple, no matter who it is, they're going to pay somebody for pieces of it that they're using. So, and even if they're just buying Wi-Fi chips, a piece of that Wi-Fi chip price is going back to the people who own the IP on Wi-Fi. So It's more about non-exclusivity. So in the kind of areas that you're in, it doesn't buy you much to be exclusive. What people want is freedom to operate. So, and to give you an example, Verizon versus AT&T cell phone service. Cell phone, LTE, you guys all have heard of it. Some of you probably are studying all the development of that sort of thing. That's just the standard, right? It just says how features will be implemented within the framework going forward. And every year they put a new release out, which describes some new features, and then people scramble to go design product around those features. Okay, so AT&T has one strategy for providing cell service. Verizon has a different strategy. Verizon wants coverage. AT&T wants quality. Okay, so the way you implement the things is based on what your strategy is. AT&T can say, we give you the best service where you live. If you look to see where AT&T service is, it's in cities and along interstates. That's where people mostly are. And out in the wilderness, they don't care because there aren't very many people out in the wilderness. So what they do is they provide the service that's high quality, but they don't cover all of the customers. Verizon, on the other hand, gets high enough quality, but they cover everywhere. You can't go anywhere without getting a Verizon signal pretty much. I've got Verizon because just for that reason. So for Verizon, it's coverage, but you get more dropped calls. With AT&T, you get very few dropped calls, but you don't get service everywhere. And each one of them, that's a business strategy, not a technical one. But it results in what sorts of technologies are implemented by the product they support. The Verizon wireless communication is done a different way than the AT&T. I don't know how many other different ways there are doing that, but you can't just swap phones out. You can't take a Verizon phone and hook it into an AT&T network. At least you couldn't. I don't think you can now. So again, it's back to the business side of things. How your technology, if you come up with a great way, we had some discussion about how to spoof it or something like that, It may work really well under one scenario, but not at all in another scenario. And you win based on whether that scenario is chosen. And even though you had a great idea and it really would work, but if nobody's using that scenario, So it's back to the Betamax. They had great technology, way better, but nobody's using it. So it was all VHS. And we went through all this stuff. So we get about 170 administrators. We get about 25 patents issued every year. There are 4 of us that do licensing. We have started having office hours on campus. Now, our offices are over in the CRC across the hall from VT Knowledge Works. But on Wednesday and Thursday afternoons from 1 to 5, we are set up in, there's a room up on the 3020 Torgerson, so it's on the library end of Torgerson Bridge. There's a classroom on one side and there's a little room on the other that's got some displays or something. We're in there on Wednesday and Thursday afternoons from 1 to 5. And you can make an appointment or you can just drop in and talk. If you have any questions, if you know people who need to get some information or advice or want to understand how the policy works or how any of this works, or the people that came in this week, they basically they had apps they were going to do. They wanted to start a company and they didn't know what to do. They were mostly undergraduates, except for that one group that we got. And so what I do is I direct them to the places on campus where they can get the kind of resources they're looking for. If you want to know about disclosing something to us, then I'm there to help you and walk you through the form if it's unclear. Talk about your invention, whether it really is an invention yet or not, that sort of thing. And answer pretty much any kind of question that relates to intellectual property and business formation, that sort of thing. So stop in. Again, it's just at the end of Torgerson Bridge on the library side. You're coming across the bridge toward the library, it's on the right, just to get across. Unfortunately, the door is locked, and you have to use your passport or your ID card to get in. But you can also just knock on the door and if you can't get in. That's probably, most of the rest of this is very detailed and talking about all the details of patenting. Anybody have any questions? bored you enough? Yeah. He has them. I gave them to him, so they're available for you. Yeah. Yes. Mhm. Yeah, it's a fuzzy thing right now. You used to be able to patent software, but the patent office and or the Supreme Court has pretty much prevented that now. The only thing you can potentially patent now are algorithms. And we have done some of that, but I think it's better most of the time to actually write software and copyright software. Now, it's weaker, but an algorithm is essentially a method patent. Method patents are notoriously difficult to challenge or defend. And I don't know how successful we would be in challenging somebody that we thought was infringing. It's just so difficult to do. I won't say it's impossible because no, it can be done, but we prefer not to try to patent algorithms because it's just so hard anymore. The first answer is no, it's an algorithm that do it, software essentially. And then we have to go back and fight with them over whether you can do it or not. And there's enough case law out there now that they will almost always win those arguments. Not always, but often they win. And it costs us so much money to prosecute that. And the likelihood of us being able to defend it successfully is low enough that we don't normally do it. But if you come up with an algorithm that is just unique, like there was anybody know what wires on demand is? Dr. Athanas, so there was a graduate student here several years ago who created something called wires on demand. It's essentially the ability to rewire an FPGA in flight. It was really clever. I'm not sure anybody really knew how it works except the guy who came up with it. That's what they told me. We did patent that, and it was essentially an algorithm. But it never got implemented anywhere directly. And eventually it was abandoned, I think, because it was a little too early. We couldn't market it. We were going to try to go to Altera or Xilinx to some of these places and try to market them, and they really weren't interested yet. And so what we wanted to do, try to get the graduate student to do a startup and work on it for a couple of years and get it in a place where you can stand it, keep people working. He wasn't interested in doing that, and we didn't find anybody else who was interested in doing it. So eventually, it just died from a patent standpoint. The technology is still good. It's just not patented. I think you potentially could make money off of it with a startup. But what you'd want to do is the same thing we said at the beginning with, start a company, create a system that programs or is implemented somehow, in products, and then sell that whole thing to Xilinx or Altera or somebody and let them take it to market for you, because you can't, it's hard to do that yourself. That's like writing software to do circuit design and trying to implement it when LabVIEW's just sitting out there, and all they have to do is see what you did and go do it too, and they can do it slightly differently and get around any kind of protection. So the best thing to do is license it to National Instrument, but then take it to market. Because they're powerful in the market. They've got the distribution channels. They can have it right in. They've already got a process for people doing that. You can just go come up with something cool that you think they'd like, show it to them, and if they like it, they'll go ahead and put it in their catalog. And then people can buy it and they can do some money. And that's what you want, because you can't go compete with them at this point. You'd have to come up with something earth-shaking that takes them out as a viable competitor. And I don't know how you do that with them. They're just too entrenched in the market right now. When you guys come up, it's cool. First thing you do is learn how to use LabVIEW, right? Well, maybe it's not LabVIEW anymore. Maybe it's something else, but it used to be LabVIEW. Because it's easy, right? You can do your projects really quickly, and somebody's always coming up with new modules for you to use and all that. And you get to learn the higher level stuff much faster because it exists. And you can debug it, and it's just designed for you to use. It's really hard to start from scratch and do that again. So what you want to do is make them your friend. they may not take it right now, but if you work on it for a little while and get up to the place where you know they would want it, then they'll take it. And you usually do that with a startup. You might get a little bit of investment, take it and go. So that's kind of the way that business works. Then you have open source software. Lots of people like open source licenses. We do that here. And what you do is you don't make money off the software, you make money off the service. So Linux, right? Linux is free. You can all have Linux. What are you going to do with it? If you don't know how to program Linux, it doesn't do you any good at all. So what you do is you pay somebody to program it for you. So you create something that's going to be done in Linux. It's free software, but you pay somebody to implement it for you because they know how to do it and you don't. All you want to do is make the product. They know how to make it happen for you. There's a lot of open source software done that way, and you've got to play to run into a lot of that sort of thing. Another thing about open source is other people can improve it for you for free. And you can just learn what they did, and you can still sell a service. And so what you're doing is selling a service, not the intellectual property itself. And that's also a powerful way to make money, especially when things are changing so quickly. Yes.
So, which department has the highest
Electrical engineering, ECE. I haven't counted them up, but I'm positive that's it. There are a pretty large number of chemical engineering companies too, but mostly ECE. I think it's probably the biggest department on campus. I think, but certainly most prolific. Guys like Jeff Reed, his name's all over all kinds of stuff. But and I'm not saying that he's the only one that invents anything. He's the one that sends it to us, and he's very good at nailing, the utility of it. It's a useful thing when he's working on it, and that's one of the things that we tried to do. Try to convince the faculty members to do research in the direction of something that is marketable, and then we will be able to work it better for them. We can do a lot of cool stuff, but if nobody wants it, then we can't do anything with it. Yeah.
So what's the focus? Things that how will you do it? You guys write off the building.
Well, what happens is, so you give us the invention disclosure with description. We talk to you about it, make sure we understand it. We make sure, first of all, that it really is an invention. That it also looks patentable. We do a prior art search to see what else is out there like it. Then we do a market analysis to see if there's anybody out there cares. And if all those things are positive, and we often file a provisional application immediately because it protects you while we're figuring it out. But we go through and do an analysis, and then the next thing is to do the patent protection and do marketing. I just told you what the timeline on patenting was, but we can we can license the IP before the patent ever issues, and that's in fact most of the time what we do. We license the applications. So that when it issues, it belongs to the licensee. It doesn't belong to them, and they're renting it essentially. They pay us for the privilege of using it. And what we do is we'll create a license agreement that has some kind of an upfront license fee, reimbursement of patent costs, some kind of diligence milestone that say you have to go work on this and make a product. And we ask them to give us a business plan that says how they're going to practice the invention. And then we construct the milestones from that. And then at some point out in the future, based on their projections, is the first commercial sale. And from that day on, we get royalties. And the all that money comes into VTIP, and then we disperse it according to the policy. It takes a long time. I mean, you're talking, in many cases, it may be 5 years before you start getting the royalty stream. You get some stuff along the way, but the royalty stream doesn't start coming in probably for several years, depending on exactly what the technology is and how fast it can be. But imagine if you came up with a chip that does something. How long does it take to get that chip into a product? First of all, the chip has to go to somebody who manufactures chips. And they have to actually design all the stuff that goes with that, do product runs, do quality testing, all that, and then they offer it in the catalogs. And then the users go design with it, okay, into the next cycle of product. The next cycle might be 2 years out. So each one of these things takes time. So we often don't see any revenue, royalty stream for maybe 5 years. But we will get some license revenue before that through milestone payments and that sort of thing.
All right. Any other questions? Can we take them off? Let's thank our speaker.